Welcome back to Green Disruptors, Scaling the Future. I'm your host, Megan Kjar. Today, I'm joined by Gene Gebolys, founder of World Energy, joining us from Boston. Gene has been focused on energy transition basically his whole life, and in this episode, we zoom in on a concept that could change how decarbonization scales, insetting, also known as book and claim. We talk about why policy alone isn't enough, how markets can fund decarbonization faster, and why Venmo for carbon might be the mechanism that helps multiple industries move forward. Hope you enjoy. Let's dive in. Hi, Gene. Welcome to Green Disruptors.
Hey, Megan. Good to be with you.
Thanks. We were just talking about where you're joining us from. So tell everyone where you are and what it's like right now.
Coming to you from sunny Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah, we're enjoying beautiful autumn weather here in Salt Lake City. So lovely day to have a conversation about world energy. So tell us a little bit for context sake. Tell us about you and your professional background, but then we'll hone into world energy.
Sure. I have been interested in alternatives to traditional energy since I was a little kid. I did my seventh grade science project on what was then called wood alcohol or ethanol, and my eighth grade on electric vehicles. And I have been interested in how the world transitions beyond petroleum kind of all my life.
Was this like fed to you by your parents, or like where does a young kid
Where
care,
does that come from, right?
That's unique.
Right. I think it was early observations about long gas lines and the energy shortages of the early 1970s. I was a little kid. I was kind of learning about how the world was changing. My mom was really into politics. I was just hearing all about this, the energy crisis of that time, and then we go into the Carter years, and he addresses the nation with a sweater on and was telling people to turn their thermostats down. So the issues around energy were really a part of
Front and
my,
center, maybe.
yeah, just part of my kind of as I was coming of age. Energy and how humans live were, I didn't know it then, but they were kind of, those topics were getting infused in my head.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it takes a special kind, like everyone is technically hearing the same information, but how you absorb it and the level to which you care, I think says a lot about you as a person and your environment at the time. But
Yeah, I think, like early, in young adulthood, we've got the Gulf War. I remember exactly where it was and how that when the first night of bombing and that and
yeah,
how that kind of all unfolded. And I don't know, just issues around energy and the human experience. I read The Prize a long time ago, and that really impacted me on just how the world works. And it seems if you don't understand energy economics, you don't really understand how the world works. I don't know. It's been a long run. I started World Energy in 1998. So we're 27 years in, and we've been pretty much doing the same thing in one way or another ever since the
hmm
start, which has been working on the transition away from fossil-based energy. And it was important for entirely different reasons when I was a kid than it is now, but it's still important. And so the impulse of the eighth grade science project and the work I'm doing today is pretty much the same.
that's pretty cool. I mean, I guess the sense of urgency now is greater since we've come to understand climate change and the speed at which we need to implement these solutions. What has that meant for the company over the course of the last 10 years? Because things have changed a lot.
Well, it's interesting, right? We live in these times where it seems like we're ever more in parallel realities, and some of us see a reality in which this is becoming extremely urgent, and it seems pretty unmistakable, the urgency of energy transition, and that we move in the direction of more sustainable paths to how we power everything. And then there's another reality which others seem to be operating in which it's a hoax. It doesn't matter. It's worse than it doesn't matter. It's a way to give away value to other countries and other places. And so, it's that's a little disconcerting. I would say you had asked about kind of a 10-year time frame. The whole idea of climate science and how it's become so political, that really wasn't as present over the course of so World Energy is a 27-year-old business. It really wasn't such a partisan issue when we started.
Oh.
A lot of early legislation that helped in our early growth came out of the Bush administration. So it really wasn't what it is today in terms of this parallel reality that we're seemingly navigating.
Yeah, definitely makes it's like these are important problems that need to be solved. They make business and human sense at the same time. So it's like it's sad that we overcomplicate it. But what are kind of the main things that the company's focused on at the present moment?
So we are kind of going through the same transition as a business as we have gone through. As we've evolved, we've moved from a business that's really focused on producing and distributing low carbon molecules that displace higher carbon molecules. And we've been doing that now for going on 3 decades. When we moved into sustainable aviation fuel in a plant that started producing the first commercial quantities of sustainable aviation fuel in 2016, we went on this learning journey that now is really shaping how we think about everything going forward. And the learning journey was that decarbonizing flight required us to detach the work of the low carbon molecules from the molecules themselves. And so many people have heard of offsetting,
Mhm.
and that's kind of got a checkered history of low decarbonization efforts that are often hard to quantify. Well, insetting is a new emerging concept that's kind of the opposite of that. It's decarbonization efforts that are very quantifiable and very traceable and in the same sector. So
Mm,
when we create low carbon jet fuel, that is displacing higher carbon jet fuel. And so that we can quantify those carbon impact differences. And in insetting, it's in sector displacement of carbon. So we can't use the work we do in aviation to displace carbon emissions as it relates to factories, let's say, or some other thing. They can only be
right.
used to decarbonize flight. But
I mean, that
in
makes sense to me. Sorry, you go
Yeah,
ahead
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'll.
please. Yeah, no, go ahead. Well,
I
if
was
you're
gonna
going to
say,
agree with me, definitely go ahead.
well, it's like, can everyone get a hold of their own tent, please?
Yes,
Like if there's a way to do it, then if all the industries were able to take a similar approach, it would be easier to track instead of, we use this many gallons of fuel, so we got to make sure that this many trees get planted thousands of miles away and that the
right,
trees
right.
don't die.
That gets a little mind blowing, or cook stoves in Africa or whatever. And how do you trace this? And does that
Yeah.
really displace the emissions of a flight from point A to point B? It's a little tough to
And either way,
quantify.
you're still going to be continuous, like a tree grows much slower than a person hops on a flight.
So this concept of insetting, which we didn't invent it, it really was an idea that came out of the Rocky Mountain Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And we kind of encountered this idea really around this idea that people were trying to fly in and out of major environmental conferences, Davos or the annual COP conferences or so forth, with decarbonizing their activities. So we had a
Hmm.
very, very famous billionaire that had contacted us and said he wanted to fly to and from Davos on our staff. Well, we were going to have to take our sustainable aviation fuel and physically move it to where he flew from,
Which creates more
then
of a.
take more product and go over to Davos with it so he could fly back. And it was so farcical that obviously you can't do that. Like, how much
Mhm.
carbon emissions are you going to emit in the interest of
Right.
decarbonizing a flight, right? So but it was really important that we came across that because there's clearly demand. There's someone who's willing to pay the incremental cost. And if we can do that efficiently without moving fuel all over the place, then we can create demand, which then drives supply, which then drives innovation, which drives
Hmm.
scale, which drives, greater and greater ability to decarbonize. And so what it really kind of led us to, you asked a few minutes ago before I started rambling, you asked, where is the company going? Well, it feels like we have kind of accidentally found the golden ticket. And the golden ticket isn't about sustainable aviation fuel or any
In
particular.
it, like physical product
Yes, it isn't
itself.
about any particular product for any particular industry. It's the idea that insetting creates the currency that allows markets to drive decarbonization. And markets have been the big missing piece of decarbonization. For 30 years, the governments of the world that started in Kyoto, and now every year we go somewhere. This year it'll be in Brazil. The governments of the world get together and we try to negotiate some mechanism by which governments can control emissions from their particular country.
Right.
It's very complex. It's very challenging. It needs to continue. But we've put all of our eggs in this basket that somebody else, some other governments, or some representatives of the various countries around the world are going to go to some place and come back with the answer. And I think it's pretty clear 30 years in, that's not enough.
Yeah.
That is not enough.
Yeah.
So I am almost feeling evangelical these days about the fervor for, oh my gosh, what happens when you activate markets? What happens when you get private actors for their own reasons wanting to decarbonize their activities, whether it's because of their commitments they've made or because of frankly, the hypocrisy of doing something like going to an environmental conference on a private plane in which you're not decarbonizing the activity, right?
Truly.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty overtly hypocritical. But if you can pay for the decarbonization difference and frankly feel compelled to do that, well, then that drives scale, that drives markets, that
Yeah.
begins to break down the fundamental market structure problem. In energy, basic energy is all the stuff that creates energy are commodities. So you've got whether it's oil or coal or gas or whatever, and there's no differentiation between these inputs, or very limited differentiation between these inputs. So energy is generally about cost. You don't really care too much about how your lights come on. You just want your lights to come on. What
Exactly.
what insetting allows us to do is to sell the physical attributes at their cost. So when we make sustainable aviation fuel, we just sell it at the value of jet fuel, and it is only sold as jet fuel. It's not sold as anything special. It's just jet fuel. It's just going to make an airplane go from point A to point B. But then by capturing those attributes, by insetting, by capturing those attributes, and by really tracking and tracing the entire supply chain so that we can verify on third-party standards the difference in carbon emissions
Hmm.
associated with that fuel, we can then make flights from anywhere to anywhere viable in ways they could never be viable before. And so, you asked about kind of where the company is headed. Yeah, we still provide physical stuff. We create physical stuff, but it's this mechanism that is really front and center in what we're doing now, and why I like getting on into conversations like this about
Yeah.
the possibilities of where we can go. And so our mission is very much to drive insetting as the vehicle for decarbonization in all kinds of fields. This is how we're going to decarbonize steel. This is how we're going to decarbonize building materials. This is going to be how anything that is effectively a commodity that can be produced in a much lower carbon way, that screams for an insetting solution. So, coal making, which is, upwards of, I'm sorry, steel making, which is based on coal, is responsible for up to 9% of global emissions. It's a big problem. And the technology exists to displace coal with much lower polluting clean hydrogen. as a vehicle to separating iron ore from iron. So that's the most carbon intensive part of steelmaking. If we can do that one activity in a much cleaner way, we can really start to make significant impacts in how the total amount of emissions coming from steel. But the issue then is, how do you monetize the cost difference? Because it's more expensive to do this with hydrogen than it is to do it with coal. And you have to
Hmm.
be able to monetize that difference. And it's not just steel manufacturers are going to say, out of the goodness of our hearts, we're going to pay more in a very cost competitive environment to produce steel or iron that comes from a lower carbon process. The answer is golden ticket is to get markets involved. If someone's buying an $80,000 vehicle and it costs another $500 or $400 to decarbonize all the steel in that vehicle, and they make that decision as they're buying uh, larger rims and a better sound system and better interior and other things, all of which are more than $400,
For sure.
then some buyers will buy that. And now we're activating markets in ways that they aren't currently activated. Ultimately, could you get to a place where any vehicle over $100,000 decarbonize the steel? Sure, of course you could.
Yeah.
The work that we're doing really right now is to take the learnings that we've come upon in decarbonizing aviation. Obviously, we have to really scale in aviation before we move on to 10 other things. But to start to do the work on how can we use these exact same tools and exact same mechanisms to drive progress in other areas.
From a business model standpoint, do you see World Energy acting in a consultory type of a role, or is it like you move on to another sector in the ways that you're implementing these solutions?
Yeah, there's a million ways to when I talk about connecting markets, you obviously have to bring in supply. You have to bring in
Hmm.
third-party registries. You have to bring in third-party audit capabilities. This all has to operate on a digital platform. You have scope 1 emitters. So in aviation, that would be the airlines. You have scope 3 emitters. So again, in aviation, that would be the company that's flying their people or their freight around on the airplanes. And all of that needs to be tied together in a cohesive ecosystem. So from a business model point of view, we've got a World Energy Net Zero Services business, which does exactly that, which is helping customers really with a focus on the scope 3 customers. Those are the ones flying people and stuff around. They don't buy fuel. Those people, these people buy services that are enabled by fuel, but they don't actually buy fuel. So um, our customer base has been really fantastic, and we call them customers, but what they really are is partners in helping us stand up this capability. And they're, household names, big companies in consulting and tech and finance and companies that have made commitments to decarbonize and now really need to find new ways to do it. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm. We are by no means the only ones participating in insetting these days, but we were at the tip of the spear in aviation, and we've got a lot of credibility in this space, hard earned over nearly a decade. But the idea now is to make these linkages. It's really, we can't do everything here. That
Yeah.
wouldn't enable things to scale very effectively if we were trying to do all things for all people. So while we started on production that we ourselves produced, these tools don't relate only to product that we produce or customers that we've brought in, um, or connections between scope 1s and scope 3s that we've enabled. The idea here is to drive the tools that allow this mechanism to scale.
Yeah, that makes sense because the tools and the processes can be repeatable throughout different industries and different
They're
technologies that they're
super
using.
scalable. They're super scalable as long as somebody's not trying to control all of the aspects of it. So we're not trying to control all of the aspects, whether it's our current customers certainly want to buy from more than us. They want to
Yeah.
buy at the best
Yes,
they want to buy at the best price points they can buy, with the most diversity of supply, with the best transparency, with the easiest reporting, with the best integration into their own accounting systems and so forth. So all of that needs to be built out, and that's really where we're highly focused now.
yeah. So does that mean, I usually in these conversations I like to ask about current bottlenecks. Like,
Mm.
what is the biggest challenge of the moment? I mean, is that it? Or
This kind of work is hard. It's always been hard.
like my
I
life is
never,
bottlenecks.
yeah, I was gonna say, kind of life is a bottleneck. Yeah,
I mean, that's true. It's solving
yeah,
the current problem one at a
yeah,
time, perhaps,
yeah.
right?
So I don't know. You run into stuff that you need to address. It's what I don't do anymore is go to conferences and sit on stages with other participants and complain about government policy.
Wise.
Whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah.
We
Can't
cannot
fight
sit
reality.
around and wait for somebody else to figure something out. So, yeah, there's always going to be fluctuations in policy, and if we live in democracies, policy is going to flop around. It's going to go from one side to another, and
That's what
as
it's
our
supposed to do.
our elected officials get more and more very much one way or very much another way, the more the policy is going to have even greater variance. So we've got to focus on what we can do and what we're able to do within our own control. So what bottlenecks that we're working through. I don't know. The team would probably rattle off 50 without any trouble. But
I'm sure they
look,
would.
I always think the biggest bottleneck is myself and
Mm,
us. And if we can stay the course, we know what we're doing is of use, and we can go and really drive that so that we are of use. Listen to the partner/customers, listen to other suppliers, really try to focus on what is really the mission. How do we drive that mission most effectively? We'll be fine. We're going to always run into obstacles. We're always going to run into challenges. If we can have a good team and stay motivated and stay committed to the objective, don't get too distracted by the distraction of the day. This is totally off topic here, but I'll go down it anyway because I find it interesting. I think Mary told me to make sure I kept my answers to 2 minutes. So much for that. I may be going
Can't say that's
longer than that.
coming from her and not me. So you go right ahead. I guess she's the one who.
But it's really important that we all we all know that we have to watch what we take in for food or alcohol or what we ingest into our bodies. What is a little less obvious is that we've got to be careful about what we ingest into our minds and how
Oh, I'd say
distracted we
that's
can
number
get.
one.
Yeah, and how distracted we can become when we're letting too many other distractions throw us off our game. So bottleneck, I'd say it's that. Stay
Yeah,
focused.
oh, I love that. I mean, mindset is where everything starts or where everything could fall off the rails and end. I have a poster on my wall here that says definiteness of purpose. So being able to never forget, your North Star and what's most important, like what's the two things that are going to move the needle the most today. It can help you avoid those distractions. Maybe we'll wrap up. So with insetting, it's kind of I mean, it's a new concept to me. I'm sure people in the industry are more familiar than I would be, but how big of an education gap is there? And how are you finding that you're able to kind of fill that gap with both your customers and just public partners and stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it probably it leads to a good answer to your previous question, which is what is the biggest obstacle, right? But yeah, obviously, I remember the first time I heard about insetting. It's sometimes referred to as book and claim. It's a book and claim carbon accounting system. But whether it's called book and claim or we call it insetting, either way, it's there's a moment at which you're saying, wait a second, hold on. So you're producing some product in Los Angeles. It's getting put into a plane in Los Angeles. And that is somehow enabling somebody to move from Switzerland to Seattle in a decarbonized way. I almost started laughing when I first heard about it. Like, come on. How do you, hey, yeah. But
Not a straightforward math equation.
right, right. But if you had said even 15 years ago that you can go out with a bunch of friends to dinner and then just send each other the money electronically to settle up on that particular dinner, that'd be like a what? If
But it's the most simple solution
of
once you
course it is,
understand
and
how it works.
it's
Yeah.
simple, and it all it is a ledger system. All we're doing is a ledger system. It's the exact
Mm,
same thing. What's the
that's a
difference?
great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Venmo.
Venmo. Yes, that's
Venmo
it.
for
So
carbon.
Venmo for carbon, that is exactly what we're working on. And once you get past that barrier, you're absolutely right that the learning curve is a little steep at first. I had a hard time getting my mom to realize she didn't really need to balance the checkbook any longer.
Oh boy.
That it
Yeah.
was that it was okay.
I still see people doing it in the grocery store. And it's like, oh,
But but once we get past balancing the checkbook and understanding that ledger systems work and that they can be traceable and that they can be third party verified and that they can be robust and strong, this is the way
I
to
can
go. This is how
see the
decarbonization happens.
totally. And I can see the curve happening quickly. It's like once a few early big adopters start doing it, then it will start being used more often, and then suddenly everyone's doing it, and it makes sense, and you
Be
understand.
careful, Megan. You too might get a little evangelical about this. It's a pretty powerful tool. It's pretty
I
cool.
was born to be evangelical about something at all times, so I'm fine with it.
Fantastic. All
Not
right.
one of those.
This is my gift to you. You go nuts with it.
Give me a soapbox, I'm ready. No, I'm just kidding. Well, not really. That's true. So, but anyway, this has been really interesting and exciting to hear. And I'm glad that you have found your golden ticket. And I think it's going to continue to pay off as things move
Well,
forward.
I am certainly hopeful. And thanks a lot for the conversation and for talking it through with me.
Yes, thank you. You made it easy to understand, so I appreciate that.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Gene. Bye.
Gene, thank you again. This conversation was energizing, and I really appreciate how clearly you explained a concept that isn't always intuitive at first. My big takeaway is this. If we want decarbonization to scale, we need market mechanisms that make the low carbon option financially doable, not just in aviation, but in steel, building materials, and beyond. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed to Green Disruptors and share it with someone in climate or energy who's thinking about how we fund impact at scale. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.